Hello. Today we're going to be stream monitoring, doing field data, and the point of this instructional video is to show you methods to do this entire stream monitoring in about 40 minutes with very high quality considering we're doing field tests. So as we first walked into the area, we paid attention to the surroundings, looked around, checked for any birds, changes in the stream environment, looked to see if we see any fish before we disturb the area. We call this facing downstream left bank. This is right bank. Always as you're facing downstream. We have a camera so we can take pictures both upstream, downstream, and in the stream. We'll also take a picture of the bank. Anything that we see here that we think should be documented, we'll do with our camera. The steelhead that we're usually looking for face upstream and usually wiggle like this. So if we walk upstream very slowly and quietly, that's when we'll often see them. If we walk this direction towards them, they might see us first and disappear. So we want to make sure that we can sneak up on them. So pay attention to where your shadow is, move slowly. If you reach an area where you think there might be fish, just wait silently for just a short while, and maybe you'll see them come back out after you move. It's good to look in sunny portions of the stream like this. They're easy to see, oftentimes because their shadow is black, and you'll see that black shadow on the bed a lot easier than you'll actually see the fish. We're looking for anything from 1 inch to 3 or 4 inches, hopefully. 3 or 4 inches would be a fish that's overwintered. Let's see if we can see anything move down here in this big stream pond here. At least 2-inch fish right here in this big deep pool here. Part of the quality assurances that is quite important is the rinsing method that we use for all of our containers. The rinsing method that we use is after we're done, we rinse twice. Before we use anything, we rinse it once and discard any waste in the waste bottle. And we're going to start this right now with today's date and the time that we entered the area. We make basic observations about the area. For example, is there a cloud cover, which there is today? Has there been any precipitation recently? Is there any now? How is the wind? These are all observations that we note on the form here, and basic observations about the flow of the stream too. We're also going to note all of the equipment IDs on this data sheet before we start so that that's taken care of. The conductivity meter, which is this here, our dissolved oxygen kit, the pH kit. We have an air temperature thermometer, and we also have 2 things in our YSI kit here. We'll open up now. One is the YSI meter. We'll note its ID. Our turbidimeter, which is also labeled with an ID. What we're going to do is change the water in the calibration cup. There's only a small amount in here, but we're going to dump this out before we start. Anything that's dissolved or DI water or the distilled water is okay to put on the ground. Anything that has chemicals in it will go in the waste bottle. You only need about 1/8 of an inch in the bottom of the cup. We're going to put the cup on loosely, just barely start to thread it. So there it's on, and a 1/4 turn just so that the cup is very loose on there. And we'll attach the cable to the meter. This is a multi-pin plug. You carefully find the place where it slips on. Move this collar over till it slips down, and then you can push in and tighten the collar. Now this is assembled, and we're going to power it on so it can begin to warm up. And there it is in the run mode. We're going to let this sit for just a few minutes while we start some of the other chemicals. This will stabilize as it warms up, and that's what we're waiting for calibration. So the first thing that I like to do is to get a couple of the easy tests started and out of the way. One of them is to hang our air temperature thermometer somewhere in the shade. So we're going to find a convenient branch here. So have gloves in our kit so that we don't contaminate any of our samples with our hands. The first test that I like to do is the conductivity, which is with this meter, and we just stick this probe into the stream, rinse the tip once before we start, and you must remember to turn this on and back off again when you're done, otherwise the batteries will run out. So this probe is used in the stream facing upstream, and we hold it there for approximately 2 minutes. Note the number immediately. We're going to rinse it twice. Make sure it's off. Put the cap back on, and we're completely done with this. We can put it back in the kit. The next thing that we're going to do is take a water sample so that we can begin the dissolved oxygen. We use a sample collection bottle here. We're going to place in the stream. It has the water temperature thermometer in it as well. Take the sample bottle that's inside, this small sample bottle. We're going to rinse this before we use it. We're going to use the waste bottle for this just to be sure there's no residue from past monitoring. Make sure that the tube here is firmly in the lid. Goes inside of the sample bottle. And this is now ready to put in the stream. We have a weight that attaches to the bottom of the sample collection bottle to help pull it down into the stream when you have enough depth. So let's demonstrate that. We'll clip the weight on. And there is also a stopper that we want to insert in the top of this sample collection bottle before we put it in the stream. Once it's in the stream, we've lowered this into the stream and it's submerged. We're going to give it a yank and the top will come out. Remember to keep the sample container upstream from you, so any disturbing of the sediment that you do with your boots flows downstream and you don't get it into your sample bottle. Put that into the stream. Give this a yank. So make sure you want to be in a pool if you can, so you have the depth, but you also want to make sure that there's some flow through, the water is moving. So we're pretty much in the middle of this pool. And I'm going to move the bottle up and down, and we get a good representative sample of the stream column. And it's now full. You can also replace this stopper before you take it out of the water. And this water temperature looks like 14.5 degrees. Don't put your hands on this end of the thermometer because that's where the bulb is. It'll change the temperature, so always handle the thermometer from the top end here. We're going to immediately begin dissolved oxygen. We want to make sure that this test gets started right away before any air starts to change, any oxygen starts to change in the sample. We're also going to rinse the cap that we're going to use before we use it. And that's ready. We're going to add 8 drops of these first 2 solutions. When you do this, hold the bottle fully upside down so we get full drops. We're going to give 8 drops of the manganese sulfate solution and 8 drops of the alkaline potassium. We want to make sure that no air gets trapped in this sample bottle as we're doing this. It has a pointed cone shape here. So we're going to let it very gently settle in as we turn it. And you'll be able to see if there's any air that got trapped, any air bubbles would rise when you do this. If you have air trapped in there, you're going to have to start over. We'll do some slow mixes first couple of times to make sure everything gets moved around, and then we can invert this about 20 times faster. We're going to set this for a little while. We will find that in a few minutes the color will clear down past this shoulder. We want this to take place before we go to the next step. So we'll just set this aside, and we're going to check our YSI meter and see if it's ready to go into calibrate mode. I usually read the dissolved oxygen number, which now is about 10.06, and I'm watching to see if that number moves over the next 30 seconds or so. I'm not seeing any change in that number, which tells me that this is already stable and it's ready for us to begin the calibration process. Right now we're in the run mode, and we're going to press escape to back up into the menus. And I'm going to go down to calibrate. I'm going to choose that with enter. I'm going to go down to dissolved oxygen, 2 mil PE, which is the tip that we use for calibrating. I'll press enter. DO% is the calibration method we use. I'll press enter. I'm going to press enter again to accept the barometric pressure, which has an internal reader, so we know that's correct. And now calibrate shows up in the menu screen here. We're now going to let this sit and stabilize for a few minutes, make sure that those numbers don't change. In the meantime, we can do our pH test. You open up the test kit. There are 2 tubes. Both of these have been rinsed before, but we're going to give them a quick rinse again before we use them. And we're going to fill them both with our sample water up to this line down here near the bottom. I always like to stir up the sample a little bit, make sure that it hasn't settled. And a simple technique for, these both have too much water in them, so we're going to lower the level here. There, this one now is at the bottom of the meniscus, is at the line. We're going to add 6 drops of this solution. This lid needs to be pressed and squeezed as you open it. It's a stopper, so press it and you'll have the reagent there up in the tube. We're going to add 6 drops to this cylinder, and when you replace the lid, make sure it goes on securely so that you can't back it up. This works by having a color wheel in here that we turn, and we try to match the clear sample with the reagent sample. I like to hold a white background behind it, and this is a good test to check with your partner, see if they come up with the same result as you do. And we are going to put this in the waste bottle. We're now done with these. This is just creek water, but we'll still put it in here. This one has chemicals in it, so we're going to rinse this carefully twice. At this point, we should be able to add our next reagent to this. It's settled well below the shoulders, so this is ready for the addition of the sulfuric acid. This also is 8 drops. We need to be careful putting our lid on this once again. Now we're going to let that sit, and that will dissolve all these little black specks. So we'll check back with this and see how these have dissolved in a couple of minutes. At this point, I believe the DO meter, the YSI meter, is stabilized. We have readings here starting from the top: water temperature, conductivity, dissolved oxygen percentage, dissolved oxygen, and finally pH. I watch these 2 numbers here to make sure that they're stable, and they are. 102.2 is the dissolved oxygen percent. So are on the form, 102.2. We'll push enter, and it's 99.1. We're going to take it out of the calibration mode. I push escape 4 times, 2, 3, 4, which takes us all the way back out to the run menu. We take the calibration cup off. We're actually going to rinse this. There's a number of probes here. Make sure you rinse them all. We're going to put the armored cover on it to protect it while it's in the stream. This thread's on. Place it in about the same place that we took our other measurements from. I'm going to do the same thing here. We want to wait for the numbers to stabilize. All right, while we're waiting for the YSI meter to stabilize and get the results, we're going to check a couple of things here. First, we'll check our air temperature. Remember to handle the thermometer by this end rather than the bulb end. Air temperature 14.0 degrees. And we're now done with this and can put it back on our kit. Next thing we're going to look at is how our dissolved oxygen sample is doing. It looks very clear. All of the little black dots have dissolved. Once we've reached this stage with the dissolved oxygen, it's possible to let this sit for about 45 minutes. So if you had other things to do before you get to the titration, this is now okay to let sit. For this, we're going to use the starch indicator, sodium thiosulfate, and this for doing the actual titration. We also have a new sample bottle and a lid. I'm going to rinse these before we use them. And also the lid. I like to hook it over the lip here, the second lip back, and pour from there. It gives a lot of control. And I also raise it up to eye level so that I can see when we've gotten up to the 20 mil mark. Same thing, we want the bottom of the meniscus to be at the line. Add 8 drops of the starch indicator to our solution here. I'm going to put the cap on and mix it. This cap has a hole in the top for the titration, so we need to cover that hole with our finger as we're mixing this together. What we're going to do, this is a dark color, and we're going to add the sodium thiosulfate to it in small increments until the sample goes completely clear. And we're going to fill the syringe or titrator with sodium thiosulfate. Turn it upside down and draw the plunger down. We'll oftentimes get some air bubbles trapped here. Push it back up and pull down again until you don't see any air bubbles. Draw this down to the 0, so you have a full 10 milliliters in this container. That's where we'll start. And we'll add this while we're stirring. I keep a finger on the side of this here. It acts as a brake so I don't accidentally plunge it all the way down. So it's turning a little bluer. Now it's gone a little clear. There's still some blue swirls in the bottom. I'm going to note where we are on the titration. It's at 8 right now, which means we've put 8 milliliters in. And it's almost clear. I'm going to do one more drop and see if it changes. There. It's gone completely clear. At 8.2. We're going to put that sample in the waste bottle, rinse everything, and do just that titration one more time. One more drop to 8.2. We got the same result. So we're going to put the rest of this into the sample bottle now just for disposing of it. Write down our result. 8.2. Just to verify the results, there's enough here to do a third titration. We didn't need it today. I'd like for the results to be within a half a milliliter of each other. So we had 8.2. We wouldn't want anything outside 8.7, for example, as a good result. One last thing is to rinse the tray, because we've got chemicals in here as well. Okay, we're going to check and see whether the numbers have stabilized here, and we can take the readings from the YSI meter. Looks very stable. So we're going to write all of these numbers down. We can power this off and take it from the stream. Okay, we're going to clean and disassemble this here. First thing we can do is take the connecting cable off, reverse the collar counterclockwise, and pull towards you. We're going to put this back in the case. You want to make sure you don't get any sand or dirt in this cable end. You want to keep this clean, so don't let it go into the dirt or get water in there. But this end, we're going to take the guard off and rinse the probes before we put it away. Particularly important during the winter time when there's lots of sediment around. You want to make sure everything gets a good rinse so that we get any remaining sediment. Make sure this is on good and tight so the water doesn't leak out in the kit. Dry it off a little bit as we're putting it away, and this will go back. Now we can take out of the kit at this time the turbidimeter, we have 3 sample bottles numbered, so we want to make sure that as we're doing this we keep the numbered lid with the correct bottle. That way we know if there's any abnormalities in the results, we can trace it back to a problem with the bottle. For this process, we want to make sure that our sample is always stirred. We want any sediment that might be in here that's settled to be mixed back in to the water column. When these were last used, they were rinsed out with the DI water. Now we're going to just use creek water to rinse them and the lid. Keep this stirred up, and then we can fill it. And we'll do a quick rinse of the lids too. And first we're going to do a very rough drying them off. These bottles need to be kept very dry. We want to make sure we dry things fairly thoroughly. We'll do a first pass with this towel, and we'll do a second pass using the Kim wipes. This meter is simple to use. We turn it on using the power button. On the screen here, 0.00 NTU and auto range. That's the mode that we want to be in. It should be that way from the last use. If it's any questions that you might have about using this meter or any of the other field test equipment, we have instruction sheets with the kit. So this looks correct. There's a place here to put each of the vials. Have the diamond facing the little hash mark here. Press read. 1.31. And it's also very consistent with what we'd expect from looking at the water, which is very clear. One of the important things that we do as we're monitoring is pay attention to what the norms are, what we would expect to find here. For example, the pH in this creek is normally 8.0 or 8.5. If you all of a sudden had a result that was quite different, you need to note it on your field data sheet that there's something wrong with that number. If you can redo the test and find out what was wrong, that's the best thing to do. But any records that you keep are really important about differences. So this is very, very clear sample, so we would expect the number to be very low, like 1 point something or 2 point something. When it rains during the winter time, we get numbers as high as 700 NTU. So even 30 or 40 NTU, you will see cloudiness in the water. Okay, we make sure we power the unit off, and we can now dispose of the water. This is creek water, so it's okay to put on the ground. Don't forget to keep the lids together with the bottles. And I'm going to rinse these before I put them away. And we are done with our sample water. We've completed all of our tests. Sample bottle goes back in the middle of the sample collection bottle. Thermometer goes in. Try to leave it so that the gauge is showing out for the next person who's going to use it. They'll be able to see it through the outside of the bottle. And try to make sure this is in firmly before you replace it. Will also be ready for the next person. And clamp that closed. I'm going to double check and make sure that I've noted all of the measurements on the form. We have completed everything here. We have our YSI meter and our calibration results. And so now we're finished with that portion of our monitoring.